Hi, and welcome to my newest tutorial. Today we're going to be making a crochet shawl, my latest design, the Solitude Shawl. So if you're ready to jump in, let's go ahead and get some materials list out of the way. So in this one, I'm going to be using the Yarntopia Ocean color by Yarn Bee, and that's a fine weight yarn. You can use fine weight, you can use DK weight, whichever yarn you choose. This is a very flexible pattern. Whichever yarn you choose, though, make sure it's a very round and plump yarn. You want some really defined stitches on this one. All right, so now moving on to our next item on our materials list, which is going to be our crochet hook. For this one, I'm going to be using the recommended size on the yarn here, so it's a 4.5 millimeter. If you're using a different yarn, use whatever crochet hook they recommend on the yarn label. You're going to need some scissors, and then you'll need a tapestry needle to weave in the ends when you're done. This one is great. You'll only have 2 ends to weave in. So I have some handy little charts and a little diagram here that's going to help you keep track of what rows you're on. So you'll notice here that I have all these rows with all the stitch counts. And then you'll also notice that there's an orange row here, and that shows you where the double stitches in the chain space are. So we'll get into that in a second. You'll understand what I'm talking about. So if you want that, I'll leave a link in the description for that. All right, so I'm going to use my little charts and my little row counter here that I've made because they're super handy. Get situated. So I'm going to put that to the side, and I'm going to have a pen as well to kind of write down and mark what rows I'm on. So I got my little pen ready to go. So let's move this stuff out of the way and let's get started. So I'm going to pull out enough yarn here. We're going to do a magic loop. Now we'll look at the chart and see the very first thing we do is a magic loop. And how we know that is that I have a little key here that you can look up the symbols. So I'm going to simultaneously teach you how to read a chart if you don't know how to read a chart, and also teach you how to do this shawl. So lay the yarn over your hand like so, make a little finger guns, and then wrap that yarn around and then cross it over itself. So I'm going to do this again. Finger guns, wrap that yarn around, cross it over itself, hold it there in position, go under that yarn there, grab it, and then as you're grabbing it, twist and pull up. Now I'm going to do that again. So grab that yarn, and as you're pulling up, twist it so it twists that stitch and holds it onto there. And then yarn over and do a chain 1. Now it can be fiddly holding this because it's going to want to come apart. So I usually just stick my fingers in there like that and hold my thumb to hold those 2 yarns together so it doesn't open up. All right, so we've done our magic loop. Now, our first section here, our first row, tells us that we need 6 double crochets inside of that magic loop, and then we need a chain 1. Then we need to turn around and do 6 more double crochets. So we're going to turn around on the chart, but we're going to keep working forward on our piece, and I'll show you how that looks right here. So I'm going to go ahead, chain another one to get a nice chain 2, and that's going to count as my first stitch. And then I'm going to place 5 more double crochets. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. So that should give us 6 double crochets counting the chain 2 at the beginning. Now I'm going to chain 1, and now I'm going to do 6. So there's going to be 1 double crochet, 2 double crochet, 3, and so forth. So when I get to the last double crochet, then we're going to be finished with that row. So when you're reading a chart, you're always reading one half of the chart. or in this instance you are, the way that I've designed this chart. Some charts are different, but the majority that I've seen, you read 1/2 and you just kind of mirror the instructions. So let's look at what we have here so far. So we have our 6 double crochet on this side, and then we have our 6 double crochet on this side of that chain 1. So we have our little chain 1 here. So now I'm going to let the working yarn loose, pull up a loop so we got plenty of room to not let that stitch unravel. And then this working end here, this tail end, I'm going to hold that in my hand, and then I'm going to simultaneously hold those stitches flat and then pull it, and you see how it just tightens right up? Perfect. That's our magic loop. So now after row 2 or row 1, you should have something that looks like this. So when we set it down, it doesn't look like much now, but it's going to look like a whole lot later. All right, on to row 2. So row 2, we can see here that we have a couple different stitches going on. So we have this first cluster here, and that looks to be a double crochet. So we're going to need 2 double crochets in that first stitch. And then for our second, we're going to look to our legend and see that we need a front post double crochet. So we need 2 double crochet in the first stitch, and then we're going to need 5 front post doubles, which will bring us to that chain 1 space. And inside of that chain 1 space, we're going to do a double and then a chain. And then we're going to go backwards on the chart. And we're going to need a double, 5 front posts, and then 2 doubles in that last stitch. Is that starting to make sense? I hope so. It took me a second to figure out how to read charts, but once I read them, oh my goodness, amazing. All right, so I've got my hook in, I've got my yarn ready, going to turn the work, and we're going to pull up a loop. Now I'm going to do a standing double crochet because that's my favorite type to do in projects like this. So I'm going to yarn over, insert into that stitch, pull up a loop, pull through those 2 loops on the hook, and then pull through the last 2. So now we have a standing double. So we need 1 more stitch in that first stitch. So now we have our 2 double crochets in that first stitch. So there's our first stitch. In our second stitch, which is going to be right next to it, we're going to do a front post double crochet. So we're going to yarn over, stick our hook underneath that post, yarn over again, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and we just completed our first double front post double crochet. And we're going to do 5 of those. And we're just going to do front post double crochets all the way until we reach the chain space. And for this particular row, it should just be 5. But as you do more and more row repeats, that stitch number will increase. So now we've reached our chain space. So what we're going to do is place in our chain space, we're going to do a double crochet. So we placed our double crochet. Now we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to go backwards on the chart. So now we're going to do our double crochet in that chain space, and then we're going to do our front post double crochets all the way until that first or the very last stitch. So we're working our front post doubles, now we're at the last or the second to last stitch here, and this one's going to be a little bit harder to see because of the chain 3. So now we need to place 2 double crochets inside of that chain, that starting double crochet chain. So we've got 1 double crochet, and then we have 2 double crochets, and that completes row 2. Now I'm going to back up here because I want to do that stitch a little bit better. It was a little bit loose at the top. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and flip the work over, and you'll notice that doing those front post double crochets has given us a nice little texture here in the front piece of the work. So you see this nice little ridge. Beautiful. So that's how you're always going to be able to tell what side of the work you're on, is by where those ridges are. So let's go ahead and we're going to do some maintenance work here in our chart, and we're going to check off row 1, and we just completed row 2. So now we're on row 3. And row 3 you can see is an orange highlight. So that's going to give us an indicator that we need to do 2 stitches inside of that chain space in the middle once we reach it. So keeping that in mind, let's take a look and take a look at our chart here. So we've got row 3. So now we've got some different stitches. We haven't seen these yet. So what are these? These are the half double crochets. So we're going to need 2 half doubles in that first stitch. We're going to chain 1, skip a stitch. Then we're going to do a half double in the next, chain 1, skip a stitch, and then we're going to keep going, doing half double chain, and then once we get to the chain space in the middle, we're going to put 2 half doubles, and then we're going to chain 1. Then we're going to reverse and do that all over again. So once we reverse, we're going to go in that direction. So that chain, when you do the chain 1 in the middle, that's your indicator to reverse. All right, so let's get our work positioned, get our hook ready, turn our work, and I'm going to try here to do a standing half double, but I did not like the way that this looked. So pause for a second and let me get off the struggle bus before you try to join me, because this was a mess. I was like, wait, what? I love doing the standing stitches, but these just did not turn out right. So you can see I've got 2 loops on there. I'm like, what the heck is going on? I'm getting myself all confused. So I'm going to go ahead and back it up here. All right, now we're ready here. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm just going to do a chain 2. Make everything easier on everyone involved. So chain 2, and then I'm going to place a half double. I just did a double, so ignore that. Now I corrected it. So now I'm going to chain 1. I'm going to skip this next stitch here. That one's being skipped, so in the next stitch I'm going to place a half double. Then I'm going to chain 1. I'm going to skip the next stitch, and in that very next stitch I'm going to place a half double. So the pattern repeat here is chain 1, skip a stitch, half double in the next, chain 1, skip a stitch, half double in the next. And then you're going to get towards the end, you're going to skip that very last stitch before the chain space, and then you're going to drop a half double into that chain space, and then you're going to do another half double. Then you're going to chain 1, and this is our indicator to go reverse now. So now we're going to place 2 half doubles in that chain space. So we have our 2 half doubles. We're going to chain 1, and then we're going to skip that last stitch before the chain space, because that's what we did on the other side. And then we're going to go in that next stitch and add a half double. So now we're going to chain 1, skip a stitch, half double in the next, all the way until we get to the first stitch. Now, when you start doing the repeats, you're going to want to pay attention to the starting and the chain space and then the last stitch. So here in the last stitch, we're going to place 2 half doubles. So I'm inside of my half double, or my last stitch here, and I'm placing the first half double crochet. And now I'm placing the last half double crochet. So let's pull up our loop here a little bit and see what we've got so far. Perfect. So now we have this beautiful texture starting to form, and we've got these lovely little holes that we're going to do some amazing things with in a second. So that finishes row 3. So let's get our pen. We're going to mark off row 3. Now we're going to move on to row 4. So let's see what row 4 is. Row 4, we're introduced to some new stitches, but we have some familiar ones as well. So we have 2 double crochet here in this first stitch. So we can look here and see double crochet, and then we have a chain 1, skip a stitch, and then we have a new stitch here. What is this? This is a 6-loop bean stitch. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. And that goes in that chain space, then we chain 1, skip that stitch, 6-loop bean in the chain, and then we go all the way down. Then when we get to the 2 half doubles in the chain, what we're going to do is skip that first half double, and then we're going to place a double crochet in the last, and then a double crochet in the chain space, and then a chain 1. And then we're going to reverse and go the opposite direction. Okay, so let's get started. Let's go ahead and slide in our hook, tighten our yarn, get set up, and turn. So the first stitch is going to be a standing double, which I absolutely love. So standing double inside of the first stitch, and then another stitch or another double crochet inside of that first stitch. So our next stitch, we're going to do a chain 1, and then we're going to skip that stitch. Then inside of this chain space here, you're going to want to yarn over and put the hook through, but don't yarn over initially. It's going to make pulling up that 6-loop bean so much easier. So go into the chain space, pull up a loop, and make sure you pull your loop up high. And you're going to do this 6 times. So make sure you pull your loop up to the height of that stitch. Otherwise, you're going to have a heck of a time trying to get that yarn pulled through. Do that 6 times, and then once you've done it 6 times, make sure you're standing tall there with your stitches. You should have, I believe, 12 on here. So what we're going to do now is yarn over, hold the base of those stitches, and then pull that hook through, pull all the way through all of those loops, and then we're going to chain 1 to close that off. And now we're going to chain another one. So that chain 1 to close those stitches off does not count as your chain 1. Now we're going to do another 6-loop bean. You're going to want to yarn over, don't do it. So go into there, yarn over, pull up, pull that loop up tall and high. So see how it's really tall on that hook? Yarn over, and then enter the chain space, pull up a loop, yarn over, enter the chain space, pull up a loop, and do that 6 times. And once you've done that 6 times, grab the base of those stitches with your thumb and middle finger to hold them taut. Give a little bit of tension. So holding this there, like right there taut, pull that yarn through, and then chain 1 to close, and chain 1. So we're going to keep doing these 6-loop bean stitches all the way down until we get to the right before the chain space. So every chain space, we're going to add a 6-loop bean stitch in there, with the exception of the middle chain space. Now you can use a row marker or a stitch marker to kind of place into that chain 1 in the middle if you feel more confident. Sometimes it can be a little tricky finding where that chain space is. So if you need to use a stitch marker, then by all means go ahead and place your little stitch marker in there if you want. But I've made a couple of these shawls so far, and I don't need them anymore. So now I'm working on this last 6-loop bean stitch here on this part of the piece, this side of the piece. So I've chained my chain 1. Now we're going to skip that first stitch here, that first half double, and then in that second half double before the chain space, we're going to do a double crochet. So right, there's that one, there's two. So we're going to go right into this bad boy. And this pattern is very forgiving. So if you accidentally go into the first one, that's fine. It's not going to make that big of a difference. Then we're going to place a double crochet into the chain space. Then we're going to do our chain one and start our reversal. So now we're going to do a double crochet in that chain space. Then we're going to add a double crochet now into the first stitch next to that chain space. Then we're going to skip the next one because it's a mirror image, right? So we're going to chain one, and now we're going to do our bean stitches all the way down in those chain spaces. So go ahead and finish off your bean stitches, and I will meet you at the last bean stitch on this side. All right, so now we're working that last bean stitch before the last two stitches. So once we've reached the last two stitches on this round, we're going to make sure we do our chain. Then we're going to skip that second to last stitch, and then we're going to place two double crochets in that last stitch. All right, so now we've got our two double crochets in that last stitch. Pull up our loop a little bit, and this is going to be the back side. So let's go ahead and flip it around. We're going to take a look and see what we got so far. Beautiful. So you can stretch it out a little bit. It tends to be a little bit tight, this part of it, because it's at the very beginning, so don't stress too much if yours is looking like that. But we have these beautiful little bean stitches here. So let's go ahead and mark our fourth row off on our chart to make sure we always keep track of where we are. And now we're going to move on to the fifth row. All right, so let's take a look at what we've got. So our fifth row is going to start with two double crochets into this first stitch, then a double crochet in each stitch after. So we've got a double crochet in the chain, in the popcorn, or not in the popcorn, in the bean stitch. And notice here that this is an orange row, which means that there's going to be two stitches in that chain space. So now we have two stitches to put in this chain space. So double crochet two doubles in the front, first stitch, one double in the next, one double in the chain space, one double in the loop, 6-loop bean. And then we're just putting double crochets all the way down. So let's go ahead and get ourselves set up here for this row. So as always, I'm going to do my standing double crochet in this first stitch. Now I'm going to place my second double crochet in that first stitch. Fantastic. Now in the next stitch, make sure not to miss this one. In the next stitch, we're going to place a double crochet. And then in the chain space here, we're going to place a double crochet. Then in our loop 6-loop bean stitch here, we're going to see that little space right there above it. That's where we're going to place our stitch. So we're going to place our double crochet on the top of that 6-loop bean stitch. Then we're going to go in the chain space. Make sure not to go in between make sure you go into the chain space and not between the bean stitch threads. Place your double crochet into the chain space, and then place your double crochet into the bean stitch. So that's going to be our repeat for this row is going to be double crochet inside of the chain space, and then a double crochet inside of the bean stitch. And then once you get to the middle middle chain space, what we're going to do is after that very last chain space that we place a double crochet in, we're going to place a double crochet in each stitch before the chain space. So here we're reaching our last chain space, placing our double crochet, and now you can see we have this stitch here that we need to place a double crochet in, so we're going to go ahead and place a double crochet into the stitch. So now what we're doing is placing those double crochets into the chain 2 space basically that we created before. So now we're at our chain space. We're going to do 2 double crochets into there. All right, so now we're going to do our chain 1, and now we're going to do 2 more double crochets. So we're reversing the chart pattern here. So we got 1 double crochet, 2 double crochet. And then now we're going to make sure that we get those stitches. You might have to scoot those other ones back a little bit to get that first stitch out of that chain space. So we're going to have 1 double crochet to place there in that stitch, and then we're going to have another one before we get to the chain space. So now we're at the chain space, we're going to add 1 double crochet, and then inside of our bean stitch we're going to do 1 double crochet. So at the very top of our bean stitch we're adding that. So then keep adding a double crochet inside of the chain space and then inside of or on top of the bean stitch, all the way until you reach the very last chain space. All right, so we just placed our last double crochet in that last chain space, so now we're going to put 1 double crochet in the second to last stitch, and then we're going to place 2 double crochet in our last stitch. It can be tricky sometimes to get that hook into that standing double crochet, but once you do, it works out beautifully. So just be persistent. All right, so this is what we have so far. Beautiful. So you can see we have a row of this beautiful double crochet that accentuates the bean stitch. So now let's go ahead and mark off our row 5 on our chart. And now we'll move on to row 6. All right, let's move this up and let's take a look at our chart. So row 6, this is going to look really familiar. So we're going to have, in the beginning, we're going to have 2 double crochets into this first stitch. And we've seen this stitch before. This is our front post double. So we're going to do front post doubles all the way down until we get to the chain space where we're going to put 1 double crochet, and then we'll do our chain. And then we'll reverse, and then we'll do our double, and then all the way down we'll do front posts, and in the last stitch we'll put 2 doubles. So this is exactly a repeat of row 2. So we should be familiar with this one. So let's get it set up here. Let's turn our work, and we're going to place a standing double crochet in that first stitch. and then we're going to place another double crochet in that first stitch. So that completes our 2 double crochet in the first stitch. Now we're going to move on to the next stitch, and here we're going to place our first front post double crochet. So now we're going to continue placing front post double crochets all the way down until we get to the chain space. So I'm doing the last 2 stitches here before the chain space. Now we're at the chain space, we're going to do a double crochet in that chain space, and then we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to do a double crochet back into that chain space to reverse the chart. Now we're going to continue placing our front post double crochets all the way till we get to the last stitch. And I'll meet you there. All right, so now we're at the end of this row, so we're going to go ahead and place our 2 double crochets into this last stitch. Perfect. Now I'm going to pull up a loop here, and then I'm going to turn my work, and wow, now we've got another one of those gorgeous ridges here to accentuate those bean stitches. So, oh my gosh, I love this stitch. It provides so much texture and so much visual appeal. So we've got the ridge, and then we've got the beans, and then we've got another ridge. All right, so let's mark this off on our chart. Row 6 is complete. Now let's move on to row 7. So row 7, we're going to move our beautiful piece up a little bit so we can look at our chart. So what do we have here? So row 7, we have some new stitches we haven't seen yet. So we have these little tiny little stitches here. So let's look at our legend and see what those mean. So this looks to be a single crochet. So for row 7, what we're going to want to do is place 2 single crochets into that first stitch, and then it looks like we're going to skip 2 stitches, and then we're placing 5 doubles into 1 stitch. So we have 5 doubles going into this stitch here. Then we're going to skip 2, then we're going to place a single crochet in that stitch. Then we're going to skip 2, and then we're going to place 5 double crochets into this stitch. Then we're going to skip 2, single, skip 2, and then 5. And then we're going to skip our last 2 and place a single inside of the chain space. And then we'll do our chain, and then we'll reverse our pattern and go backwards. All right, I feel confident. Let's go. All right, so let's get set up here. All right, now we're set up. So what I'm going to do is chain one, and then I'm going to single crochet into that same stitch, and then place another single crochet into that stitch. I don't like trying to work into a chain one, so I'm going to do it this way. So now we've got 2 stitches in that first. We're going to skip this one, and then we're going to skip this stitch. And then inside of that 3rd stitch, I'm going to place my 5 double crochets. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. So now we have the next stitch, we're going to skip 2, right? So we got 1, 2, and then in this 3rd stitch here, we're going to place our single crochet. So now we've placed our single, so now we're going to skip 2 more stitches, and inside of this stitch here, the 3rd stitch, we're going to place our 5 double crochets. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's going to be the repeat. So we're going to skip 2, place our single or our shell stitch, the 5 shell stitch. So now we're placing our last cluster of 5 double crochets here in this last stitch. So now we should have 2 stitches before the chain space. If you don't sweat it. This pattern is very forgiving. So I have this stitch here, and then I have this stitch. So inside of the chain space, I'm going to do a single crochet, and then I'm going to chain 1, and then I have a single crochet in that chain space. If you're using a stitch marker, this is a good time to place it. So we're going to skip those first 2 stitches, and then we're going to place our 5 double crochets into that next stitch. And then we're going to continue down until we get to our last set of 5 double crochets, and I'll meet you there. All right, so now I'm working my last set of 5 double crochets into this, the stitch right before I get to the last bit of this row. So I should have 2 more stitches left before my last stitch. So let's see here. So I've got 1, and then I've got 2. So in this last stitch here, I'm going to place my 2 single crochets. Get your butt in there. Okay, there we go. So single crochet, and then another single crochet. All right, let's pull up a loop and see what we've got so far. Beautiful. Okay. Oh, I love this. Okay, so now you see we have this beautiful little wavy pattern here with that little chain space in the middle. And it gives like a nice little scalloped edge to it. So let's go ahead and mark this off. And now we're going to move on to row 8. Now, if you wanted to end your pattern, If you wanted to stop on this row when you're finishing your piece, you're more than welcome to do that. You can stop on any of the rows here, whichever you prefer. So our row 8 here looks to be a double crochet, 2 double crochets in that first, then we're going to chain 3, then we're going to do a single crochet in the third stitch in that chain 5, or into the 5 space. Now notice this, there's a chain 3 and at the start and a chain 3 before that chain space. So that's going to be where our chain 3s are. So we have chain 3, single crochet, chain 5, single crochet, chain 5, single crochet, and then we have the chain 5 is positioned between the shells here, and the chain 3s are at the beginning and before the chain space. So just keep that in mind as you're working. All right, so let's get started. With our pattern, our chart pattern handy, we're going to get set up for our next row, do a standing double crochet as always, so I have the standing double crochet and then adding a double crochet into that first stitch, and now we have our 2 stitches. Now I'm going to chain 3, and then I'm going to find that third DC, that third double crochet, and then I'm going to place my single crochet into it. Now, because we're between the clusters of 5 DC, we're going to do 5 chains, and then we're going to place another single crochet, and we're going to do that in the next shell, in the top of the next shell. So we're going to go ahead and single crochet here, and then we're going to chain 5. A good rule of thumb is if your next part of the row has a 5 DC shell, then you're going to do 5 chains. If it's the middle, you're going to do 3. So 1, 2, 3. Now that we're at the middle, and then inside of that middle space here, we're just going to go ahead and do a single crochet. So see where it can be a little bit tricky to find that chain 1 space if you're doing the single crochet? Feel free to use a marker if you want. So we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to add another single crochet into that chain space. And then we're going to chain 3, and then we're going to add a single crochet into the third double crochet of that 5 double crochet cluster. So we have our single crochet placed. Now we're going to do 5 chains. 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we're going to do our single crochet. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chains. And then we'll do our single crochet here. And then we're going to do 3, 1, 2, 3. So when you get to the end, we're going to do 3 again. And then so now we're going to go ahead and do a double crochet, 2 double crochets into that last stitch. So the takeaway here is 3 chains at the beginning, 3 chains at the middle, and then 3 chains at the end. But everywhere else there's going to be 5 chains. So you'll see now that this gives us beautiful little lacy type texture here next to those waves, so the waves don't get lost. Beautiful. So let's mark off our 8th row here. We're very close to finishing the repeat. So row 9 is going to be the last row of the repeat. So let's see what we've got to do for row 9. I apologize for the lighting. A storm cloud moved over, and so it got a little gloomy and dreary in the crafting room. So row 9, let's see, where are we at? Here. Row 9, we have double crochets, 2 of those in the first stitch, and then we have a double crochet in the next. And then in that chain 3 space, we have 3, then we have a double, and then we have 5 doubles in the chain 5. A double in the single, and then we go all the way down like so. So we're basically putting a stitch in every stitch of this row. And then we reverse and come and work our way back. So let's go. This is going to be an easy row. This is a good row to count to make sure your stitch count is good too, because it's one of those easy rows. All right, so starting with a standing double crochet, we're going to go ahead and place our 2 starting stitches into this first stitch. So we have 1 double crochet, and then we have 2 double crochets into that first stitch. So now in our second stitch, we're going to add the stitch here, we're going to add a double crochet, and now we've reached the chain 3 space. So inside of this chain 3 space, we're going to add 3 double crochets. So I have 1, 2, and then we have 3. Our next stitch is going to be a single, so we're going to go ahead and place a double crochet into that. So we have a double crochet in our single that's in the top of those 5DC shell cluster. Now we're going to reach a chain 5. So now we're going to place 5 double crochets into that chain 5 space. So we got 3, 4, and then 5. So now we've reached the next single crochet. We're going to go ahead and place our single crochet, our double crochet into that single. So you see how we have that single there? Go ahead and place a double crochet into that. Then we reached our next double crochet, our chain 5, where we're going to add 5 double crochets. So go ahead and add your 5 double crochets into that chain 5 space. All right, so now we're adding our double crochet into that single crochet, and now we've reached a chain 3 space. So you can tell here because we're really close to the middle. So go ahead and add your chain 3 or your 3 double crochets inside of your chain 3 space here. And then once we do that, we should have a single crochet here. So we're going to add a double crochet into that single crochet. And then we're going to add a double crochet into the chain 1 space. A marker is going to come in super handy here. And then we're going to go ahead and chain 1, and then we're going to add another double crochet into that chain 1 space. And then don't forget your last single crochet here. So now we've got our single crochet that we need to add in our double. And now we've reached the chain 3 space. So go ahead and add 3 double crochet into your chain 3 space and continue adding your double crochets throughout the rest of this row. So 1 into the single crochet that's in that shell, and then 5 doubles in the chain 5 space. And then once you get to the end of this row, you're going to have a chain 3 space. And in that chain 3 space, you're going to add 3 double crochets. And I'll meet you there. All right, I'm just finishing up my last chain or last double crochet in that chain 3 space, so I'm going to add a double crochet into the second to last stitch, and then I'm going to add 2 double crochets into that last stitch. And done. All right, so I'm going to pull up a loop and take a look at what we have so far. Okay, so this is the repeat for this pattern. Rows 2 through 9 are the repeat. So this is going to form kind of what we're going to keep doing over and over and over again, adding length and height to our width and height to our shawl here. So let me kind of go over this here real quick and give you a better understanding of what's going to happen. So let's move this up. All right. So we just finished this row, right? So now we're going to go all the way back down. We're not going to do row 1 because row 1 was a foundation. We're going to do row 2. So ignore row 1 moving forward. And you can see this reflected in this little diagram here, this where it keeps track. So you see we do row 1 and then we do row 2. Now when we start our repeat, we start with row 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to start over again here. So we're going to add our 2 double crochets into our first stitch, and then we're going to work the front post double crochets all the way across until we get to the chain space. And then we're going to work our double crochet into the chain space and then do our chain 1 and then turn around. Right? So this area here, it's not going to be the same exact number of stitches here. There's going to be a varying number of stitches depending upon how many repeats you've done. So we go to row 3, our little repeat's going to be the chain 1, and then we're going to do the half double, and then once we get to the chain space, we're going to do our doubles. So where you need to pay attention is in the beginning and at the chain spaces. So the middle here is going to be the repeat, right? But pay close attention when you start getting towards the middle of the work where that chain space is, because that's where you're going to get the differences. That's where you're going to have to stop the repeat and kind of pay attention. So keep working rows 2 through 9 until you reach your desired length. So you can do this as big or as small as you want. So let's take a look here real quick. So if you wanted to do 4 repeats and make like a small bandana, you could do that. It's entirely up to you. If you wanted to do a ton of repeats, you could do that as well and make this huge, beautiful shawl. So it's completely flexible and up to you. So I'm going to do you a quick example here real quick of what we're going to do. And I'm going to give you an idea here of what to expect as you're doing the repeats, kind of what to anticipate. So I'm going to start row 2 now. This is my second round of repeats. So I'm going to pull up my loop here and I'm going to do my 2 double crochets. So I'm doing my 2 double crochets into that first stitch, as the chart indicates. And now the chart says to do 5 front post double crochets, but I've got more stitches there, right? So the chart is just telling you what needs to be done. It's not telling you how many stitches to do at this point. At this point, now you're on the second repeat of this chart. So I'm just going to do front post double crochets all the way down until I get to that chain space. So think of the middle stitches in between the chain space in the middle and the beginning stitch as kind of like expanding, right? So as your work grows, you're going to have more and more and more stitches in between the first stitch and the middle of the work, and then the middle of the work and the last stitch. So you get that repeat down and then just go from there. And that's the handy thing about working from charts, is you only need to see one version of the repeat, and then from there you can kind of go forth and conquer the pattern. So you don't need to have all these written instructions telling you the same thing over and over and over again, only changing the stitch count. So you can just easily get a visual of where you're at any given point. So we know we're on row 2. So if, let's say, you had to put your work down because someone came to the door, or you wanted to go get an ice cream from your favorite ice cream shop, and you came back and you're like, my goodness, where was I at? And then you can easily look at the chart and say, okay, I know I have to do this because this is where I'm at. I'm on row 2 and I've got to keep doing my front post doubles. So now we're getting to the end of the first half of the row. So here I placed my last front post double before the chain space, and now I'm at the chain space. So now I'm going to take a quick look at my chart and see that I need to do a double crochet inside of that chain space and then do a single. So now I'm going to reverse it and say double, and then I'm going to continue doing my pattern here. So I'm going to place my front post double crochets all the way until I get to the end. And once I get to the end of this, I'm going to know, okay, I need to check my chart here and see what I need to do next. So if you're following me and you're doing the second row of the second repeat of this pattern, go ahead and keep working your stitches until you get to the end, and I will meet you there. All right, so now I've reached the end of this row. I'm going to go ahead and place my last stitches here. So it's going to be the 2 double crochets, and I could just take a look at my chart and see that real quick. Fantastic. Oh, not so fantastic. It's, do it. Okay, there we go. All right, so now I'm going to pull up a loop here, and I'm going to take a look at what we got. Yay. Beautiful, beautiful work. So you see that beautiful rib texture now, or the edge texture? Okay, beautiful. All right, so now I've done row 2. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give you a little bit of an indicator. So row 2 through row 9 is going to be a repeat. So we can write that here. We're going to say repeat. Beautiful. So just keep repeating rows 2 through 9, and your shawl is going to continue to grow and get bigger and bigger. So as you've been working for a while, this is kind of what you're going to end up with. This is the first one I did. I used True Boo by Lion Brand, I believe. True Boo. It's like a bamboo silk yarn. And so I have multiple rounds of this. I did all of the rounds included on the little diagram that I have. So you can even go more than this. You can keep going. You're just going to lose your stitch count diagram, but you can definitely keep going. You can go as long as you want and as big as you want. It's whatever your heart desires. But just keep going and going and going, and you'll get your beautiful pattern repeat. So like I said in the beginning of the video, you can use any weight yarn for this, really. I would stay away from using bulky or super bulky, as the stitches could probably get a little lost in the other stitches, and you might not get as much definition. but stick with a very round, plump 4-ply yarn and you should be good to go. You'll get that beautiful stitch definition. And I'm going to show you here real quick how to bind off this centerpiece here. So you can leave it stretched out like this. You can, tighten it up if you choose to. It's really a matter of your preference. Whatever you choose to do is entirely up to you. Personally, I like tightening it up. So I'm going to go ahead and thread my tapestry needle here with the loose end. And then I'm going to go ahead and give it a little bit of a tug. So yeah, I don't like the way that looks. Some people might like it, but I like it to be a little bit tight. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a little bit of a tug. I tugged it just a little bit too much for my taste. So I'm going to try to loosen this up a little bit. I got a little bit aggressive with it. And then I'm going to flip my work. And the key to this is going back and forth. So I'm going to grab some stitches, pull that yarn through, and then I'm going to reverse and go in the opposite direction. So I'm going to go and skip a bit here and grab some more stitches, pull that through, and then I'm going to skip backwards and start going reverse. So I'm kind of zigzagging that yarn back and forth, so it's a lot harder for it to come undone. So now I'm going to go ahead and give it a little snip here, snip, and then I'm going to give it a tug. Yeah, it's definitely not going anywhere. All right, so just keep repeating those rows and then end on whichever row that you find the prettiest. I would suggest the 5DC scallop to stop on. That would be a beautiful finish. And then just weave in your end and you will have a beautiful shawl. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, please make sure to give me a like. Let me know you enjoyed it. And if you want to be notified of new patterns when they come out, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to tag me on Instagram at Mountaintop Yarn Co. to show me what you made. See you next time. Bye.